Welcome to the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. It's been a hard couple of years for small businesses. When the pandemic hit, some were able to pivot into new areas. Many were forced into hibernation, reliant on government support. Some made the decision that they just couldn't continue operating. Now, more than 2 years later, things are picking up, though that doesn't necessarily make it a lot easier for some small businesses. I wanted to find out what it all means for small businesses in Australia and what's needed to make sure they're able to grow post-COVID. Alexi Boyd is the CEO of COSBOA, that's the Council of Small Business Organisations Australia. Alexi, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Good morning, Sean. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Now tell me, what are we talking about? What's the size of the small business sector in Australia? How can we think about it?
Well, look, what we think about is that the small business sector is actually the largest employer in the country. Collectively, we employ more than half of Australians in the workforce. And at the moment, it's topping out at between 2.2 and 2.4 million businesses. That's registered businesses. Now, of course, they come in many shapes and sizes, many sectors of the economy. That's everyone from a sole trader running a market stall all the way through to a small company, which is quickly becoming a medium company as they grow exponentially. Very difficult to put a finger on what your definition of a small business is, but what we say at COSBOA is if you're a small business and you consider yourself a small business, then we represent you.
Okay. It's a very, very diverse group. I mean, it's very hard to find a lot of these businesses, isn't it?
Well, yes, there's the businesses you can see and touch. I call it the butchers, the bakers, the candlestick makers. They're the ones that we can see on the high street and the ones we interact with on a daily basis. But then, of course, there's the small businesses that you don't see, the B2B, those who are supporting those small businesses in their marketing or perhaps their advisory roles. And, of course, lots and lots of small businesses that operate within our community as well.
Okay, so how tough have the last couple of years been for small businesses relative to everyone else?
Look, I think small businesses are pretty good at riding waves, the highs and the lows. It's part and parcel with starting your own company and recognising that there are going to be tough times. But I don't think anything could have prepared small businesses for the last couple of years. And that's in a lot of ways because much of what's happened has been out of their control, even though they've done their absolute utmost to keep their community safe, keep their doors open, keep their people employed, and keep the businesses going. So it's been tough because there's been many building and compounding effects of the virus. First, of course, there was the panic and the concern about what the virus would mean from a health perspective, and that's evolved into what do I need to do to keep my doors open and keep my people safe? And that's evolved into supply chain issues and ongoing effects of the virus from a global perspective and internally. So it's been, I guess, hit after hit for small businesses. And in many ways, a lot of them, as you mentioned at the beginning of the program, have hit a brick wall and have made the decision that they just can't go on anymore. Now, these are not insolvent businesses. Many of them are comfortably trading. They're managing to get through. They're turning a corner, but the exhaustion levels are rife. And that's what we're seeing now from our members.
Okay, do you think there was enough government support? And you're not allowed just to say no. You have to actually say, give me the, because everyone always wants government support. And if you look at, certainly the liquidators would say that there was a drop in liquidations and closures during COVID because of government support. JobKeeper worked pretty well. I'm just wondering whether small business got what it needed. And of course, keeping in mind that we're in extraordinary circumstances.
Do you know what, Sean? I think if you asked a typical small business owner if they wanted to be propped up by government support and wanted to have to fill out all the forms and declarations that they needed to do, they really just want to get on with running a business. They don't want to be propped up. They want to know that they can stand on their own 2 feet. But it has been incredibly difficult, and it's been really welcomed just to help small businesses get past the next batch of bills that are due or be able to pay the rent just so they can stay open. And let me reiterate the fact that a lot of these businesses were strong, viable, sometimes multi-generational small businesses in community, which have been doing absolutely fine up until this point. So, of course, the business support and the government support is welcome. And it comes in many forms. It doesn't just come in handouts. It could come in the form of structural change that can make it easier to do businesses. We've seen the government move fast when it comes to regulation and better regulation to make it easier. We've seen them stand up things like telehealth pretty quickly. We've seen them enable businesses to be able to trade longer hours or to, in the case of hospitality, offer different services that otherwise they would be restricted on. Those changes are welcome just as much as the cash support that's been there as well. And of course, mediation services where it helps us to come to the middle with our biggest suppliers like rent, like the supply chain, it does help to have those mediation services in place. So when we talk about support, it comes in many different forms. And yes, it is all welcome. But broadly, small businesses just want to get on with running a business and really want government to just put structural reforms in place that help them do it easier.
I take all that on board, but the question still is, I mean, we all had to go through the pandemic. Do you think the government actually did enough? There's lots of paperwork involved, and Fear and Greed is a small business, and, trying to apply for some of those particular government handouts was quite challenging when we just gave it to the accountant, basically. Do you think the government did do enough to support the sector in whatever form? Might have been a handout, might have been flexibility during the pandemic.
Well, that's a really difficult question to answer because it depends who's answering it. There's so many different structures and sectors of the small businesses. Some have gone gangbusters. Some of them have been able to make the most and really benefit from the conditions that we've been in, and others have suffered greatly. I think it depends on which sector you're speaking to as to whether or not there's been enough support. And naturally, those who have had to shut up shop for whatever reason probably feel as though that the government could have done more.
Yep.
But I think broadly, we all understand that the government doesn't have an unending supply of cash that it can supply businesses with. It's about structural reform to make it easier to do business and spending money the right way to get a tailored support into those who need it.
Stay with me, Alexi. We'll be back in a minute. My guest this morning is Alexi Boyd, CEO of the Council of Small Business Organisations Australia. Okay, away from the governments, what about the banks and the landlords? Do you think they did enough to support small businesses during it? Because, of course, the health of small businesses, if small business is healthy, the banks are healthy, similarly with those big real estate investment trusts.
Absolutely. I think when we talk about real estate, we have to factor in the situation that there are small landlords as well, and many small businesses are landlords themselves. The mediation requirement we wanted to see it continue in as many states as possible, that requires landlords and small businesses to come to the table and come to the middle ground when it comes to having it best for all. Nobody wants to see empty shops, least of all landlords, and certainly not small businesses. When it comes to the banks, the answer to that is simple. Absolutely, they could do more. All you need to do is look at the profits that they've made in the last 2 years, even when a lot of small businesses and other businesses and other sectors of the economy have not done so well. And you have to ask yourself why. There are certain things that banks can do that they're not doing well enough, which is examining merchant fees, for example. They are in a position where they have an inequitable relationship with small businesses and really do control that. Instead of small businesses being the customer, they are in fact more often than not beholden to whatever the bank decides. And the last part, of course, is small business lending. It is fraught with complexity, with difficulties, and it's very difficult for small businesses, again, in all the different forms that they come in, the different structures, to be able to get access to that capital to grow their businesses or even just to stay afloat. That is a major problem that we would like to see the government address in the next few months.
Okay, just before we get off this topic, the ATO, the tax office, they were a lot more flexible for small businesses, weren't they?
Yeah, they were. In fact, they recognised very quickly, probably faster than most other government agencies, that small businesses were suffering and that were not in a position to be able to pay. And we really appreciate at COSBOA, our members appreciated the fact that they made those changes quickly and they essentially stopped examining debt for a period of time. Now, those channels, of course, can't last forever because the tax is what we need to run many parts of our economy. But the ATO is beginning to look at debt in a different way. The undisputed debt that is required for businesses to pay needs to be looked at. And that, again, brings back banks and lenders back into the equation. How do we all work together to make sure this debt can be addressed sensibly without putting people into a situation of insolvency and help them get back up on their feet? I think you're right. The ATO has done a good job of recognising the pain that small businesses have been in and worked with them to help them set up payment plans, keep the relationship open and the discussions going to help them deal with that debt.
Okay, a couple of years on from the pandemic, we're emerging from it. Things are normalising somewhat. What's the small business sector look like now and what's it need over the next 12 months, 2 years?
In a word, hopeful. I think a lot of people are finally having a moment to take a breath to assess their viability and assess their debt levels. Up until now, they have literally been running day to day because of situations like supply chain problems and worker shortages, which are across all sectors and a massive problem. They've really just been flying by the seat of their pants, not being able to make serious decisions about the future of their business, and sometimes not even week by week up until this point. Now, small businesses have finally got customers coming in the door, they finally got contracts back in place, and they can start to see their future. So what we're asking for here is, what can consumers, what can big business, what can government do to support small businesses as they regrow? And obviously from community, it's appreciating and looking after your small businesses who have looked after you in the last 2 years by, making their services as available as possible, keeping their customers safe, bending over backwards to look after their community as best as they can. And that's what community does best. They really rally around small business. Big business, they can do a better job of procuring to small. Same with government. Look at your supply chains, examine how you are interacting with small business and do a good job of that and make sure that the relationship remains fair and equitable. Another thing we're looking at into the near and medium term is examining the ACCC and giving them the opportunity to make sure that everything stays fair for small businesses while they're in this particularly vulnerable state.
Alexi, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
It's been a pleasure, Sean. Thanks for having me.
That was Alexi Boyd, CEO of COSBOA. That's the Council of Small Business Organisations Australia. This is a Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Join me every morning for the full Fear and Greed podcast with all the business news you need to know. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.